Few things are more spectacular or more iconic Americana than the intimidating profile of a huge bison bull.
It started with bisons and a bold experiment in 1975. What followed would completely reshape the landscape and surprise every expert involved. In the mid-1970s, Florida made an ambitious decision to bring back bison to the state's vast grasslands at Paynes Prairie.
I saw bison at Paynes Prairie just last week, and I am so excited because I honestly was starting to think that they were a myth of the park rangers.
What began as a modest experiment with 10 animals soon became a lesson in resilience, adaptation, and the incredible ability of nature to heal itself. Decades later, what those bison have achieved has stunned wildlife experts and inspired conservationists across the nation. Keep watching, because what happened after these bison were released will change how you think about nature's ability to recover. The unbelievable discovery. You're driving down Interstate 75 through Central Florida, expecting to see palm trees and alligators. Then suddenly, through the wetlands and grass, you spot something massive, something that looks completely out of place. A herd of genuine American bison grazing peacefully in the Florida heat. Sounds like something from a fever dream, doesn't it? But thousands of visitors to Paynes Prairie Preserve State Park experience this exact moment every single year. They climb the 50-foot observation tower near Gainesville, peer through their binoculars, and their jaws drop open. Because there, moving through the golden prairie grass, are creatures that belong in the Wild West, not the humid wetlands of Florida. The story gets even wilder when you learn that these majestic animals are not some random accident. They're part of one of the most ambitious and fascinating wildlife restoration projects in American history. A project that started with just 10 brave bison and a dream to bring Florida's natural landscape back to life. And here's what makes this whole thing absolutely mind-blowing. Bison actually belong in Florida. That's right. Before European settlers arrived, these magnificent creatures roamed all the way from Alaska down to northern Mexico, and yes, that included the Florida Peninsula. So this isn't some crazy experiment. It's actually bringing back something that was stolen from this land hundreds of years ago. Florida's secret prairie world. Let me take you back in time for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine Florida before shopping malls, before theme parks, before any development at all. What do you see? Most people imagine endless swamps and alligators, but the real Florida looked completely different. Paynes Prairie, located just south of Gainesville, is a stunning 21,000-acre savanna that has existed for thousands of years. This place is special because it represents what much of Central Florida actually looked like. Wide-open grasslands, wetlands that flood and dry with the seasons, and an ecosystem so rich that it supported an incredible diversity of life. The Seminole people knew this land intimately. In fact, the area was named after Payne, the son of Chief Ahaya, who was known as the Cowkeeper. These indigenous communities thrived here, understanding the land's rhythms and respecting its power. The famous naturalist William Bartram visited in 1774 and was absolutely amazed by what he saw. Bartram wrote about the great Alachua savanna with such passion. He described herds of deer, flocks of turkeys, elegant cranes, and yes, horses grazing peacefully. Even back then, this place felt magical. The prairie would sometimes flood completely, creating a massive lake where steamboats actually transported cargo in the 1800s. Then the water would drain through sinkholes, and the cycle would begin again. When the thunder disappeared. Here's where the story takes a heartbreaking turn. American bison were once the thunder of North America. Can you imagine what it must have sounded like when 60 to 80 million of these animals moved across the continent? The ground would literally shake beneath your feet. These creatures weren't just animals. They were the architects of entire ecosystems. Their grazing patterns shaped the prairies. Their wallowing created water holes that other animals depended on. They spread seeds in their fur, fertilized the soil with their manure, and their very presence kept grasslands healthy and diverse. But then came the great tragedy. The systematic slaughter of bison in the 1800s was one of the darkest chapters in American history. It wasn't just about hunting for food or hides. There was a deliberate policy to eradicate bison as a way to control and harm Native American tribes who depended on them for survival. By 1889, fewer than 1,000 bison remained in the entire country, from 60 million to less than 1,000. Let that sink in. In Florida specifically, bison had vanished by 1830. The thunder was silenced. The grasslands began to change without their massive grazers, and for nearly 150 years, Florida existed without these crucial animals that had shaped its landscape for millennia. The bold plan to bring them back. Fast forward to 1970. Florida was waking up to the reality of what had been lost. The state purchased the Paynes Prairie land from a private ranch, recognizing that this precious ecosystem needed protection. But protecting empty land wasn't enough. They wanted to restore it to what it once was. This is where things get really interesting. The Florida Park Service launched something called the Real Florida Initiative. The goal was ambitious, and some people thought it was absolutely crazy. They wanted to bring back the animals that had shaped Florida's landscape for thousands of years. In 1975, park officials made a decision that would change Paynes Prairie forever. They contacted the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge in Oklahoma and arranged for something extraordinary. 10 plains bison would make the long journey from Oklahoma to Florida. 10 magnificent creatures that would be pioneers in an ecological restoration experiment. Think about the courage this took. These bison would be leaving the wide-open spaces of Oklahoma and traveling to humid, subtropical Florida. Nobody knew for certain if they would adapt. Would they survive the heat? Would they adjust to the different grasses? Could they thrive in an environment so different from the western plains they were used to? The Park Service was taking a calculated risk based on historical evidence that bison had once lived here. The first arrivals. Imagine being one of those park rangers in 1975, watching as these 10 bison stepped out into Paynes Prairie for the first time. These animals weighed up to 1,000 pounds each. They were powerful, unpredictable, and absolutely essential to the vision of restoration. The early days were tense. Park officials monitored the herd constantly, watching for any signs of stress or illness. Would these western bison accept their new Florida home? The answer came gradually, but when it did, it was beautiful. The bison began to explore their new territory, finding the best grazing areas and water sources. They discovered that Paynes Prairie, despite being so different from western grasslands, actually provided everything they needed.
That have lived in the same place since prehistoric times. What makes these bison so special is that they are the pure descendants of early bison that roamed our country's grasslands.
The prairie grasses were nutritious. The seasonal flooding created diverse habitats. And perhaps most importantly, there were no natural predators threatening them in this protected space. These original 10 bison became the founding mothers and fathers of what would become a growing Florida herd. They adapted to the heat by adjusting their grazing patterns, being more active during cooler morning and evening hours. They learned to navigate the wetlands that would sometimes flood the prairie. They were survivors, just like their ancestors had been. When disaster struck. But the story of Paynes Prairie's bison isn't all sunshine and success. In the mid-1980s, disaster struck the herd. By this time, the population had grown to about 35 animals. Things seemed to be going well. And then came the diagnosis that every wildlife manager dreads: brucellosis. Brucellosis is a serious bacterial disease that affects bison, cattle, and other hoofed animals. It causes reproductive problems, can lead to miscarriages, and is extremely contagious. Once it gets into a herd, it can spread like wildfire. For the Park Service, this was a nightmare scenario. The decision they had to make was absolutely heartbreaking. To save the herd and prevent the disease from spreading to other wildlife or nearby cattle, they had to drastically reduce the population. The herd was culled from 35 animals down to just 7. 7 bison remaining from what had been a thriving, growing population. It felt like starting over from scratch. All that progress, all those years of watching the herd grow and adapt, suddenly reduced to a handful of survivors. Some people wondered if the project should just be abandoned. Maybe Florida wasn't meant to have bison after all. But the Park Service refused to give up on the dream of restoration. The comeback. Nobody saw coming. Those 7 remaining bison became the foundation for one of the most remarkable comebacks in Florida wildlife history. The Park Service implemented stricter health monitoring protocols. They ensured the herd remained genetically healthy, and slowly, carefully, they allowed the population to rebuild. By the late 1990s, the herd was growing again, but new concerns emerged. With a small population isolated in one location, there were worries about inbreeding. Genetic diversity is crucial for long-term health and survival of any animal population. So once again, park officials had to make some difficult management decisions. They reduced the herd size temporarily to maintain genetic health, but they didn't give up on their vision. And then something incredible happened. The herd began to thrive in ways nobody had predicted. By 2011, the population had exploded to 70 animals, 70 bison roaming freely across Paynes Prairie. This was actually too many for the available habitat. The park covers 21,000 acres, which sounds massive, but bison are historically nomadic animals. They're used to ranging across huge territories. So in 2012, the Park Service began a careful management program to maintain a sustainable population of around 50 to 70 animals. They weren't trying to maximize numbers. They were trying to maintain balance. Life on the prairie today. So what's life like for these Florida bison right now? If you visit Paynes Prairie today, you might get lucky and spot them from the observation tower or along one of the hiking trails. And let me tell you, seeing a bison in Florida is an experience that changes you. These animals are massive. Adult males can weigh up to 2,000 pounds. They move with this incredible combination of grace and raw power. When you see them grazing peacefully in the golden prairie grass, with egrets landing on their backs and the Florida sun beating down, it's like witnessing something ancient and timeless. The current herd of 50 to 70 bison has adapted completely to Florida life. They've learned to deal with the heat and humidity. They graze on the native prairie grasses. They wallow in muddy areas to cool off and protect themselves from insects. And here's something fascinating. Cattle egrets have learned that bison disturb insects as they walk. So these white birds often follow the herd or even perch right on the bison's backs. The bison share the prairie with other reintroduced species too. Wild Spanish horses, descendants of those brought by early explorers, also roam the grasslands. Florida cracker cattle graze nearby. And of course, there are plenty of alligators in the wetland areas. It's this incredible mix of western prairie animals and Florida wetland creatures, all coexisting in one unique place. The ripple effects nobody expected. Here's where things get really interesting from an ecological perspective. The return of bison to Paynes Prairie has created effects that scientists are still studying and documenting. These animals aren't just wandering around looking pretty. They're actively reshaping and restoring the ecosystem. Bison are what ecologists call a keystone species. That means their presence has disproportionately large effects on their environment. When bison graze, they don't eat vegetation evenly like cattle do. They're selective grazers, and they move around constantly. This creates a mosaic of different grass heights and plant communities across the prairie. This mosaic effect is incredibly important for other wildlife. Different birds prefer different grass heights for nesting. Small mammals need various vegetation structures for cover. Insects thrive in diverse plant communities. So by just doing what bison naturally do, grazing and moving, they're creating habitat for hundreds of other species. The bison's wallowing behavior has created small depressions across the prairie that fill with water during rainy seasons. These become temporary ponds that amphibians use for breeding. Birds use them for bathing and drinking. In the dry season, these wallows become mineral-rich areas where other animals come to lick the exposed soil for nutrients. The challenges that remain. But let's be honest about something important. This story isn't all success and celebration. Managing wild bison in modern Florida comes with serious challenges that park officials deal with every single day. The biggest issue is simple: space. Paynes Prairie, while massive by Florida standards, is tiny compared to the historic range bison used to roam. These animals evolved to be nomadic, traveling hundreds of miles across vast grasslands. But Paynes Prairie is bordered by Interstate 75, Highway 441, and increasingly by urban development around Gainesville. The bison can't roam beyond the park boundaries. This creates management challenges. How do you maintain a healthy, genetically diverse population in a limited space? How do you ensure they have enough food and resources without overgrazing the land? These are questions the Park Service constantly grapples with. There are also concerns about human-wildlife conflict. Bison might look calm and peaceful from a distance, but they're wild animals that can be extremely dangerous. They've charged at visitors who got too close. Park officials have to constantly educate the public about keeping a safe distance, at least 50 feet from these powerful creatures. Recent development proposals near the park have raised alarms among conservationists. In 2025, there were plans for residential construction adjacent to Paynes Prairie. Environmental scientists worry about light pollution affecting wildlife, increased traffic creating barriers for animal movement, and runoff contaminating the water systems that the prairie depends on. The bigger picture of bison restoration. What's happening at Paynes Prairie is actually part of a much larger movement happening across North America. The story of these Florida bison connects to an incredible nationwide effort to restore America's national mammal to its rightful place in our ecosystems. In 2016, Congress officially recognized the American bison as the national mammal, joining the bald eagle as a symbol of American heritage. This wasn't just symbolic. It represented a commitment to conservation that goes back over a century to the efforts of President Theodore Roosevelt and early conservationists who saved bison from extinction. Today, the Department of Interior manages about 11,000 bison across 4.6 million acres of public land in 12 states. In 2020, they launched the Bison Conservation Initiative, a 10-year plan to coordinate conservation strategies across the country. Then, in 2023, Secretary Deb Haaland announced a $25 million investment in bison restoration efforts.
The U.S. Interior Secretary says she wants to bring more large bison herds back to Native American lands. Secretary Deb Haaland announced today that she's directing $25 million from last year's climate bill.
A crucial part of this movement involves returning bison to Native American tribes. Remember, the near extinction of bison was directly tied to policies meant to harm indigenous peoples. Organizations like the Intertribal Buffalo Council work to return bison to tribal lands, restoring not just ecological balance, but also cultural connections that were deliberately severed. The Rosebud Sioux Reservation in South Dakota established the Wolacota Buffalo Range, which will eventually support 1,000 to 1,500 bison on nearly 30,000 acres. Tribes across the country are welcoming bison back to their ancestral lands. It was about conservation, healing, cultural restoration, and justice. The surprising health benefits of bison restoration. Here's something most people never think about when it comes to bringing back wild animals. The presence of bison at Paynes Prairie has actually created unexpected benefits for the entire ecosystem's health. And I'm not just talking about plants and smaller animals. The whole system becomes more robust and resilient. Scientists have discovered that bison grazing patterns help prevent the buildup of invasive plant species that would otherwise choke out native vegetation. Unlike cattle or horses that graze in predictable patterns, bison move unpredictably across the landscape. They might heavily graze one area, then leave it alone for months while they focus on another section. This natural rotation prevents any single area from being overgrazed. The nitrogen cycle in the soil has dramatically improved since the bison returned. When these massive animals fertilize the prairie with their manure, they're not just adding nutrients. They're creating hotspots of biological activity where microorganisms thrive, which in turn supports healthier plant growth. Studies from other bison restoration sites have shown that grasslands with bison have significantly higher soil carbon storage than those without them. Water quality in the prairie's seasonal wetlands has also shown improvement. The diverse plant communities encouraged by bison grazing create better filtration systems for rainwater. Root systems of various depths reach different soil layers, preventing erosion and reducing runoff pollution. It's like the bison are helping the land heal itself simply by being present and doing what they naturally do. The legends and myths surrounding Florida's bison. Now let's talk about something fun. Over the decades, Paynes Prairie's bison have become the subject of some pretty wild stories and local legends. Some of these tales have a grain of truth, while others are pure imagination. But they all show how these animals have captured people's imaginations. 2,000-pound bison is standing in your lane. It made national news and reminded everyone that these are truly wild animals living in an increasingly developed landscape. Another popular legend claims that the bison at Paynes Prairie are somehow different from western bison because they've adapted to become smaller and more heat-tolerant. While it's true that animals can adapt over generations, the reality is more complex. The bison haven't physically shrunk, but they have changed their behavior patterns significantly to cope with Florida's climate. They're the same species, just living smarter in their subtropical home. Some visitors swear they've seen albino or white bison at Paynes Prairie, which would be incredibly rare and spiritually significant in many Native American traditions. Park rangers have investigated these claims multiple times, and while there have been bison with lighter coloring due to seasonal coat changes or mud coverage, no true white bison has been confirmed at the park. But the fact that people are looking for them shows how special and almost mythical these animals have become in Florida's cultural landscape. Comparing Florida's bison to other restoration projects. Let's put Florida's experience into perspective by looking at how it compares to other bison restoration efforts around the country. This gives us a better understanding of what makes the Paynes Prairie project unique and what challenges are universal to bison conservation. Yellowstone National Park has perhaps the most famous wild bison herd in America, with about 5,000 animals roaming freely. That's nearly 100 times more than Florida's population. But here's the interesting part. Yellowstone's bison face many of the same issues as Florida's, just on a different scale. They deal with disease concerns, boundary conflicts, and debates about proper management strategies. The difference is that Yellowstone has millions of acres, while Paynes Prairie has only 21,000. Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota manages about 400 bison and has become a model for genetic conservation. Their herd is considered one of the most genetically pure populations because it descends from animals that survived the bottleneck of near extinction without interbreeding with cattle. Florida's herd came from Oklahoma's Wichita Mountains Refuge, which also maintains relatively pure genetics. This matters because genetic purity affects the animal's ability to thrive in their native habitats. The American Prairie Reserve in Montana is attempting something truly ambitious, creating a prairie ecosystem larger than Yellowstone, where bison can roam alongside other native species. They currently manage about 800 bison on over 450,000 acres. Comparing this to Florida's situation highlights the fundamental challenge: space. Florida will never have that kind of vast open territory available for bison, so the state has to be smarter and more creative about management. What makes Florida's project remarkable is that it's succeeding despite being one of the smallest bison restoration efforts in terms of available habitat. The fact that these animals are thriving in subtropical conditions that are completely different from the Great Plains environment. Most people associate with bison proves just how adaptable and resilient these creatures really are. It also suggests that bison restoration might be possible in other unexpected places across their historic range. In 1975, Florida reintroduced 10 bison to the savanna ecosystem of Paynes Prairie, not hundreds into a desert, but a small herd into a restored natural habitat. Over the decades, these animals faced disease, management challenges, and limited space, yet they adapted and thrived, gradually transforming the land around them. Today, about 50 to 70 bison roam freely, symbolizing resilience and the power of ecological restoration. Their story is one of courage, science, and hope, a reminder that conservation means not only protecting what remains, but restoring what was lost. Those who visit Paynes Prairie and see the bison grazing across the golden grass are witnessing a living chapter of Florida's natural history reborn. What do you think about bringing bison back to places where they historically lived? Should more states consider similar restoration projects? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.